Good evening, everyone. We're going to entertain the early birds with a short video presentation featuring photos from Climate Fast's busy year in 2021. It was made by Colleen Lynch, and she's also performing the music. And while it's on, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat.
We have called it out, we have said it loud, what now? From a single voice to the greatest crowd, what now? With our arms wide open, for every drop in the ocean, make a resolution. We say tomorrow's a new day. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. We can plant the seed, we can make the change right now. For a better world, for a better place right now. With our arms wide open, for a change, every drop in the ocean, for a change, make a resolution. We say tomorrow's a new day. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders.
Welcome, everyone, to Climate Fast's second Kitchen Table Climate Conversation training session. Our goal this evening is to have everyone feeling ready to host and or facilitate provincially focused conversations that will help in the effort to get a climate-friendly government elected in Ontario this June. My name is Val. I'm one of your hosts. Quick notes, the workshop's being transcribed in real time, and the main space is being recorded for those unable to attend this evening. The breakout groups will not be recorded. Tonight, we gather as part of an ever-expanding global movement of people who have a vision of a cooperative world order, guided by justice, peace, and hope for a sustainable future. In these most troubling times, I ask you to keep the words of Pete Seeger, the famous American folk singer, in your hearts. You know it's darkest before the dawn. This thought must keep us moving on. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Susan. Thanks.
Thank you, Val. As a settler, I would like to acknowledge that the land I stand on today is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe. This land is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Should we have the humility to listen and learn from the people that have lived here for thousands of years, we will learn about the importance of cultivating respectful and harmonious relationships with all living things, and how much more enriched our lives would be if we slowed down and listened to the earth. We would learn how we need to free ourselves from the traps of overconsumption and only take what is freely given, never more. We would be reminded that we are the children of the earth and we should love the earth as she loves us. We will realize the disconnection that the colonial way of living prescribes has meant we are not caring for the earth the way it needs. To learn from the indigenous knowledge that stewarded the land for centuries before the settlers arrived would inspire us to be better citizens. Tonight we meet to learn, at its most basic, the power of storytelling. We will listen to other climate stories, share our own climate stories, and we will learn how to create a space for more climate storytelling. It is in this spirit I will share the words of Richard Wagamese. In the dark depths of long winter nights, spirits slumber too and allow their stories to be told. These are the storytelling moons. Elders and storytellers who have been given tales to carry speak softly, reverentially, and the people hear them. The people do not merely listen, they hear. To hear is to have a spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical reaction to the words. Sometimes at very special times, you have all four reactions and are changed forever. Share stories. Fill cold nights with the warmth of your connections, your relationships. Hear each other and be made more. That is the power of storytelling.
Hello, everyone. So Mark, if you could put the slide up, I'll speak to what we touched on last webcast. I do notice that many of you are here for the second time for the second webcast, and you are most welcome. And those who weren't here, this is what we talked about last time. We did a basic introduction to the kitchen table climate conversation, and we talked a little bit about how to talk about the climate, like asking open questions and helping give everyone space around your circle. We did talk a little bit about how to tell our own stories. We showed a little bit of what potentially people could talk about on a provincial level. And then we broke out again and we talked about common values and what it is that the people around our table might be concerned about or care about. And then we just discussed what's next, which was this webcast. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Val to introduce us to the night's agenda.
Thanks, Colleen. So tonight's called Ready to Talk Climate in Ontario. So the first 35 or so minutes, we're going to look at some sections of the kitchen table climate conversation. We call it KTCC for short, for those of you not familiar. We're going to touch down on certain sections and how they could connect to the Ontario context. Then we're going to do some troubleshooting difficult questions. It's a role play, and I think you will enjoy it. And then we will have breakout groups where we will do what we refer to as conversation mapping, getting you started on maybe some concrete plans, and we'll go from there with some next steps to end off the evening. Next slide, please. So this is our standard kitchen table climate conversation agenda. And we're going to show you how it can be adapted to the Ontario scene. You'll see that there are some pieces that are highlighted, that are a little darker, and those are the ones we're going to touch down on tonight in the first part of our agenda. Yeah, that's all. So we're going to begin tonight with Sandra doing a quick recap and framing of the impacts and experiences that she spoke of at the last workshop. So I'll pass it over to Sandra.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Val. And hi, everyone. I'm Sandra. So glad to be here with everyone tonight. So in the last KTCC, the climate crisis was framed as a crisis of larger issues. It's a crisis of ongoing colonization, a crisis of imagination, a crisis of disconnection, a crisis of social justice, a crisis of care and compassion, a crisis of responsibility, and a crisis of unhinged power and hubris. And again, I want to credit the Climate Resilience Project for inspiring this framing of the issues. So I followed up with that by illustrating how these larger issues are reflected in provincial policy design. And through an intersectional lens, I explain how all these crises baked into policy amplify negative impacts and outcomes for our most vulnerable communities. And this was further validated with the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just published this past Monday. So it's more important than ever that we get ready to talk climate in Ontario. Next slide, please. So the latest Ipcc report focused on climate impacts and ways to adapt. In summary, the climate breakdown is everywhere. It's widespread, it's pervasive, and it's worse than previous assessments suggested. It's affecting all ecosystems, people, settlements, and infrastructure, but impacts are not evenly distributed. On a hopeful note, we have all the solutions we need to adapt, but time really is running out. This time around, leading climate experts from all around the world applied a more focused social justice lens to the science of the climate crisis and illustrated all the ways that over half the world's population, between 3.3 billion and 3.6 billion people, are highly vulnerable to climate impacts, including but not limited to rising sea levels, scorching wildfires, food and water scarcity, which millions of people are already experiencing, extreme heat, and how impacts to physical and mental health and well-being, to livelihoods, to culture, to social security and stability are disproportionately concentrated on the poorest and most vulnerable communities. The Ipcc report illustrated how the climate crisis is a threat multiplier for billions of people around the world. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for Canada? What does this mean for Ontario? The Ipcc emphasized that the countries most responsible for the climate crisis must help pay for its devastating impacts on the rest of the world. It means that at all levels of government can no longer claim bold climate ambition while subsidizing and financing fossil fuels. At the provincial level, it means that the government needs to get serious about an emissions reduction strategy to achieve our 2030 climate targets. It means the provincial government needs to implement a just transition to ensure that workers, Indigenous peoples, frontline and vulnerable communities can benefit from the jobs and increased quality of life that will result from the necessary shift to clean energy. It means that the provincial government must protect and restore nature, from forests to rivers to wetlands to peatlands, to help with climate adaptation and mitigation. And it means that the provincial government must rise to this moment to not only protect and prepare Ontario for the increased climate disruption still to come, and this map illustrates all the ways we are already impacted or will be impacted, but it also stresses that we must do our part in the global effort to decarbonize to ensure a livable and sustainable future for all. So in the next sections, we're going to talk about how we work together to accomplish all that we need to accomplish.
Thank you very much, Sandra. My name is Lynn, and I'm here tonight to talk to you a little bit about how we work together and why we think the climate conversations is a useful approach to get people engaged. So could we have the slide, next slide, please? So we sometimes look at what we call the 5 S's. What does it take to get people engaged? You know, we're trying to reach out beyond our own numbers as environmentalists. We're trying to find people, everyday people who may be family, friends, work associates, neighbors, and people in our faith community, we're trying to get those people to come and be engaged and learn a bit more about climate and what can be done, especially during this lead up to the election. So here are some of the things to keep in mind that help bring people aboard, help people get engaged. One of them is stories of success. So if, for example, you're introducing the evening, you're the host or your facilitator, you might say something you've done to make a difference, or things that you've noticed that have made a difference. For example, I could say together we managed to get the City of Toronto to adopt the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative in July, after a 2-month campaign. That is something we were able to do. So anything that would give people a sense there are things you can do to make a difference. Signals of progress. So do we notice that we're actually reducing our emissions through whatever means we might decide to take on? And that it's a supportive environment. None of us are perfect. We're not perfect environmentalists. And so we support each other in trying new things out, in reaching out and learning more, in helping people with job transitions, helping people in whatever ways. We can create this new world, but we're really going to have to create it together. So the more supportive our environment can be for learning together and acting together, the more we're going to get done. People benefit from simple nudges. So it might be they would make a change in their diet, they would change how they do the transportation, but they might change how they get involved in an election too. That is something that we're talking about right now. Make a difference by voting, certainly for sure, but also volunteering, getting involved in a project in your community, such as a climate action plan. Does your community have one? So there are things that people might decide to take on and do together. And that's the last S I'm going to talk about, is social. When we do things together, we get a lot more done. I know that one of the things that Green Neighbours 21 did was bring together neighbors to collectively get solar panels for the rooftops. And it made it much more expensive and much more fun, really, to do it when we're doing it together. So those are some examples of things to keep in mind about what motivates, engages people in getting involved. So we're now going to show you a short clip with Anne Keary talking about social change and our kind of theory of social change. How are we going to get where we need to go and put sufficient pressure on to get the changes we need? So go ahead, Mark.
How do we get our government to take action on the climate crisis? And one answer to this question comes from a political scientist called Erica Chenoweth. And she suggests, she's done a bunch of studies of hundreds of campaigns over the last century, looking at both violent and non-violent campaigns to change government policies or to change governments. And she found that non-violent campaigns were twice as likely to achieve their goals as violent campaigns. And further, that once a non-violent campaign had achieved the active and sustained participation of just 3.5% of its population, it almost always succeeded. As Chenoweth put it, no government can withstand a challenge of 3.5% of its population without either accommodating the movement or, in some cases, extreme cases, disintegrating altogether. And she pointed to examples like the Philippine People Power movement, in which millions of people were marching in the streets of Manila, which led to the ouster of the Marcos regime. Going back, looking at those who participated in the civil disobedience and non-cooperation movements led by Mahatma Gandhi in India, that led to India's independence. And of course, the civil rights movement in the United States. Of course, there are many other factors, but getting people into the streets can affect change. And she points out that non-violent protests work for a number of reasons. They're welcoming of a broad range of participants, in contrast to violent campaigns where you need young, fit and healthy people to fight, but a non-violent campaign can welcome the young and old, people of various abilities. They will attract the less active who sympathize with the cause. So if you see 6 people outside your window participating in an event, think, oh, I don't know, maybe I won't go. If you see 600, you think, oh, that's interesting, maybe I'll join them. But if you see 6,000, maybe you'll get out of your seat and you'll go and join that group. And they also work, she points out, by to some extent disarming security forces. So the police or the military are less likely to fire at crowds, which may include their own friends or family. So something to bear in mind, getting out on the street can have an effect. Another way of looking at social change, social nudges, adopting and nudging others to adopt sustainable behaviours can help bring about larger changes. And this is not to say that focusing entirely on individual lifestyle changes is the answer, but it is to say that individual lifestyle changes can add up to larger changes. They also count. It's another way of affecting change. And here, there was an experimental study done which suggested that if you have a minority pushing for a change in a social norm, for the adoption of a new social norm, once that minority reaches 25%, that can trigger a tipping point that pushes the rest of society to adopt that social norm. Everyone adopts the new practice. And other studies have shown that even when one person makes a sustainability-oriented decision, other people can follow. So small nudges can add up. For instance, of people who knew someone who had given up flying because of climate change, half of them flew less as a result. Personal behavioural changes can also be encouraged by government. And we see this, for example, in Toronto's promotion of the Green Bin project or making bike share available. These also work as social nudges. And a combination of personal and government approaches can be effective. So government incentives to install solar panels can encourage homeowners to act. But in effect known as social contagion, when neighbours see someone else putting up solar panels, they are more likely to do so too. So that has been observed in a number of cities. Talking about climate change, one of the studies show here that one of the ways in which to introduce the topic of climate change and climate action is to talk up the co-benefits and make it fun. For example, if you're talking about solar roofs, point out that this will also help generate green jobs, the shift to a green economy. It's a job producer. And of course, we most recently heard Joe Biden using this very effectively. When I hear climate change, I see jobs. So he was using that strategy, talk up the co-benefits. Things like this wonderful green wall, which is in Singapore. Not only are they beautiful and they enhance urban spaces, they boost our mental health, they improve the insulation of buildings, they bring nature into the city. Active transportation improves our personal health and our public health. So let's get everyone cycling. It not only reduces emissions, it can overall improve our health. And for those who are focused on, who have economic concerns, it turns out that cyclists will spend more on local shopping than people in cars who are driving by. So there are just lots of ways to talk up the co-benefits of climate action and climate solutions.
Mark, for showing us that excerpt of the video. I will say, by the way, Climate Fast has a lot of videos, and I'll just put the link on our website in the chat there, and also on the climateconversations.ca website. But I did also want to say that the video that the 5 S's is taken from Per Espen Stoknes video, there's a link there, and we'll put that in the doc links that we send to you after tonight. So over to Colleen now.
Hello again, everyone. I am actually in charge of looking at the section, what needs to change and what could that look like, and areas for change at the provincial level. And to do that, I want to screen share the Provincial Backgrounder website that we created. So I'm going to do that now. So I hope everyone can see that. So what we have here, it's a resource that you will get a link to in the chat, and you're welcome to look at it now or just listen to me talk through it and look at it at your leisure. And it's to support you in figuring out a conversation arc for the people you might invite around your table, or just to give you some facts to back you up when you choose what you're going to talk about. So the front page here, now there'll be a lot of text, and I'm just going to highlight some bits as I go through it. And I'm actually going to ask for your input too to help me choose which sections to look at. So this is the front page, and it kind of introduces what a kitchen table climate conversation is, and then how the backgrounder works. And it does follow that agenda that you saw earlier, more or less. It starts with some impacts and goes through some actions and solutions and what we can do if we work together, and what else we can do. So I'm actually going to ask for your input right now. I have divided areas for change on a provincial level into about 18 different points. And so I'm going to actually try to see chat, and I'm going to ask you, imagine a group that you might have around your table, and what might they be concerned about, and what might they care about of the three choices, health, housing, or cost. So whoever actually wants to put in chat whether you'd like to look at health, housing, or cost for your group, that would be great. I'll just wait a second to see if anybody will put something in. It'll be first come, first serve. So housing, yay, thank you so much. So if we're looking at housing, I'm actually in the first one here going to start with what's the climate plan, and see which pieces there could speak to housing. And before we do that, I want to run you through this page to show you the way that this has been divided up under each of the buttons. So first of all, it starts with challenges and loss. So in the climate plan, of course, we've had, as you know, a lot of rolling backwards. And there are lots of points here to support you if you want to talk about that. I'm just going to highlight a couple. With the cancellation of cap and trade, the climate plans we had did grind to a halt. Basically, it stopped almost all of them. And we had our ambition cut by 30%. There are a number of points here. I want to actually just point out the last two bullets. So the Auditor General in the past 2 years has come out with scathing reports on the climate plan. And if you do want to dive into getting more details, I would advise looking at those two links to see if you can see what the summary that the Auditor General made, because she's very good and that's very up to date. So I'm just going to roll through the page. As I said, we're not going to rest on everything, but the next section is what do we need instead? So that's kind of like actions and solutions and exploring what we need to ask for. And as you roll down, you see there are 3 buttons that you could actually, if you're interested in buildings with transportation or waste, and we said housing, right? So we might return to buildings in a moment and look at that a bit more. As far as housing goes, there's an emergency section on each page, and there's a climate justice section, which comes next. And I just want to say that under emergency, there are points like establishing a date to ban the new gas connections in housing, which is an emergency level action, and creating a crown public money, public funded ways to encourage and develop workforces. So as far as housing goes, I want to make one point under climate justice, and that is about rent control. So under the basic climate section, if you're talking to your group about housing, you will find a section on costs, which talks about affordable green retrofits and the need for strict rent controls. That touches on housing, and it might resonate with your group because affordable housing is a very, very top and key issue in Ontario right now. And the just transition as well, the labor opportunities and the green job opportunities that are really possible in the housing in retrofits are there. So as I said, there's an awful lot here, but I think you could certainly connect the climate section with housing, and there's lots of points here. There's examples of wins as well, which is really, last week, when we did the last webcast, we found that people need to hear about these stories, about the success stories of working together. And so in each of these buttons on the website, there are a few wins. under each one. And this one is about getting a 2030 net zero target in Halton Hills. That is the most ambitious target in Ontario, even broader, but more broadly than that. And that was the result of a lot of people working together to convince the council, that was really important. And then what else can we do? There's a section, there's some groups you might join, ways you can take action and ways you can learn more under each button. So as I said, this is just to kind of support you in sort of discovering things you can say and work on in your group. And actually, I'm just going to quickly click on the buildings, and then I want to show you how the other sections could work and connect. So of course, the energy efficiency, which I talked about already, we lost a lot of energy efficiency incentives, and we could ask for some of those again. We could ask for increased energy efficiency requirements, and that would actually up the jobs and make more green housing. Like people, the other thing you could say is that people in apartment buildings are experiencing more and more heat impacts, and we really need public housing and social housing in apartment buildings to be energy efficient. But I'm not going to take longer there because I want your help again in sort of picking one under the biodiversity section that would go along with housing. And I think if you look at them, there's several there that could conform with housing. If anybody has an idea or a button they want me to follow, stop the sprawl. Exactly, that's the one I would have chosen, yay. So there, under that one, we see the highways. That the two highways that people in Ontario are very concerned about are the Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass. And there's a little bit of information on those highways here. They're going to harm farmland, wetlands, habitat, species at risk, and waterways. But they also will increase sprawl, increase car use, and sort of short circuit climate plans. So what do we need instead? Gentle density, compact communities, green spaces protected. And people in Ontario, a lot of people in Ontario are very concerned about this. So this is a good way, I think, a good way to start talking. And the gentle density is really connected to housing, right? I want to rest a little bit on the wins in this section because I love them. So first of all, we got an assessment on 413 at the federal level. So people pushing and acting together, got the federal level to come in and sort of take over. But this one I really love. Hamilton and Halton Hills, they have a Stop Sprawl group, which you might know about. And they have successfully convinced City Council to vote for no boundary expansion, which means they are prioritizing the gentle density and the compact communities over sprawl. And so what can you do? Look at all the sprawl groups that have started everywhere in Peel and Aurelia and Durham. And so I'd encourage you, if you are in different areas, to see if you have a group that you can join. You can learn more about gentle density. Right now, municipalities are doing a comprehensive review to decide whether they're going to vote for zero boundary expansion or accept low density sprawl. So if you have something like that going on in your area, there's some tips here for what you might do about it and get people engaged to work on it. So one more section just to get your input and we'll just touch on it. So in the strong communities, there's I think an obvious one for housing there, but yeah, maybe I will just go to it because I'm sure you can see it. So the affordable housing, right? So under here, we have so many threats and losses right now. We've had rent control in new buildings canceled. We've had funding cut to the Advocacy Center for Tenants. You can see there's lots of things here under the strong communities that we have lost, and we really need strong rent control and more affordable housing. So connecting that to climate again, part of building and safeguarding a livable world includes safe shelter. And some of the key words are accessible and affordable and energy efficient. Renter protection while we do retrofits is really important. Energy efficiency is a climate justice issue. Indigenous communities have infrastructure gaps and housing crises that need to be addressed. Example of a win, I don't know if you know about Acorn, but Acorn works on renter protection. And in Toronto, they had a lot of people email and write letters and make calls, and they actually got added on February 17th, not so long ago, money in the budget for bylaw officers to help with landlords that are violating property standards. So municipally, they've come in and taken up some of the slack on the provincial level, but we really need to keep pushing on the provincial level, right? So that they address these things too. So one other thing, and then I think I'm going to go back to the front page and just show you one more thing on the front page. But you see the last point here? This is Ontario's Affordable Housing Task Force report that came out recently. This is a comment on it, and it's really astute. It has a lot in it. They're not going to address for low and mid-income people. They're not really going to address the problems with this plan, but they do have some things like allowing for low rises to be built where they're not allowed now. Some things like that will help with the dental density. So there's things we can support and things that we need to sort of point out that aren't quite right in that report if we want to concentrate on housing. So that's a lot, but that's just an example of, and you can pick one or two points that you feel that you would help you make your climate conversation, whether it's even if you just need an example of a win or whatever, you can look in this document. But I wanted to show you one more thing. If you need more general things on this page, the more resources, there's like a document with common questions and answers, which is kind of old, but I think it would be very, very helpful with questions like, why does it matter what we do in Ontario? And sample answers. So there's that if you wanted to look at that. And after the role playing, you might, think of more questions, and some of them might be in there. But this is also a page with like more ways to introduce the impact. So here's the new Ipcc report video, for example. There's some Ontario level things, the regional perspectives on Ontario. That is a really, really good resource. And at more actions and solutions, ideas, and more working together work stories on that page. So that's just more for your general KTCC if you need it. And that, I think, with that, I'm going to stop sharing. It's not as accessible to share a website page, but I hope that helps you see what might be useful for you. I'm going to pass it back to Val.
Thanks, Colleen. That is an absorbing resource that Colleen has worked very, very hard on, and thank you so much. It's going to be really helpful to our work. So what you have before you here is a slide that those of you who were at the workshop 2 weeks ago will recognize, possibly, if you remember. This is our Quadrant Exercise. It's one in which we brainstorm actions and solutions. When we're on a Zoom KTCC, we do it in the chat. The next slides to come are from ideas that participants wrote in the chat. And so the first is ideas for individual actions that could come from participating in the kitchen table climate conversations. So everyone could pledge to talk to their candidates, or campaign for a climate champion, or write letters to the editor, start a petition, or organize a webinar. They could volunteer for a group, they could stand with Indigenous land protectors, donate to a cause, even plan a direct action. So the idea here is that groups could decide on doing one of these things together as a result of their conversation. Next slide, please. Here's a list of community actions that could come out of kitchen table climate conversations. Again, these were taken directly from the chat from 2 weeks ago. So there's lots of participants like yourselves who had these good ideas. So the community could plan to hold more conversations or help organize a debate, develop a campaign to raise pre-election awareness on various climate-related issues, start and/or participate in community activities that lend themselves to thinking about the climate leading up to the election and beyond it. So just for example, I'm planning to start up a community garden in my neighborhood, and I hope that whilst doing that, I will get around to talking to people about the urgent issues with regards to the upcoming election. So again, a group could come out of a conversation and decide to do one of these things. Next, please. There's a section in our quadrant for brainstorming about what industry and business can do. I pulled out positive things that local businesses could do to contribute to pre-election climate awareness in their communities and at their businesses. I also included on the right of your screen a few ideas to engage with industry, like the energy industry or the construction industry, for example. Next slide, please. Finally, our brainstorm produced ideas about what we want of a provincial government. These are policy platforms that we can push candidates to endorse if they do not do so already. These are ideas that we can press for when organizing and attending actions like those mentioned in the earlier community action slides, like all candidates meeting or debates, or when visiting or talking to candidates at the door. Climate Fast is part of the newly fledged Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign. It's hammering out 10 to 12 point program that speaks to a lot of these asks and more, and we will share it with people when it's ready. Our hope is that as many community organizations across the province as possible will sign on to do it. There's one more section of government, yes. So not gonna read these, but give you a few seconds to read through these wonderful creative ideas that people came up with the last session. Again, things that we could ask of candidates to ensure that the next government of Ontario has this kind of policy in their plans. And sometimes we finish the brainstorming session under actions and solutions with a few visioning questions on how do we build a better world. So some examples might be, how does a good low carbon future look like to you? Or what does it look like to you? How do we build a new positive story about the future? Like Susan was talking about in the land acknowledgement. What gives us hope? How might we make a low carbon future work best for everyone? Okay, so I think that that's good enough, and then now I will pass it. Oh no, I won't. I'll pass it to myself, pardon me. This is just a moment to remind you where we are now in our conversation tonight, or our training. So we've finished number 1. We've looked at some sections of the KTCC, and now we are going to do the troubleshooting difficult questions, and that's going to be a role play. So I'm going to pass that over shortly. Actually, I'll finish telling you what else is going to happen. Right after that, we'll have breakouts where we'll map some conversations. We'll come back for a very brief main group again for next steps. Okay, over to the actors.
Actually, I think me first.
I guess
that's okay. I guess I'm an actor too, but right now I'm not acting. I just wanted to introduce the troubleshooting and role-playing section by talking a little bit about, sometimes we're concerned about the difficult questions, and that's what they're going to role play for us, which will be incredible to see. But another way to sort of start thinking about the difficult questions and how to answer them is to think about common ground and the common values, which we started talking about last week. So I've kind of grouped together 2 slides here. So how could climate justice benefit people's lives, and what are good outcomes people care about? Start thinking about that and how to sort of address that. So top concerns in Ontario now are COVID and healthcare, and climate is in the top 5. So I just was thinking about the different approaches and frames that could work for people who are concerned about COVID and healthcare, and the frames of protection, protecting what we care about and the people and places and experiences we care about, and health, better air quality and less extreme heat and food security, that type of thing is all connected with health. And some of the entry points, burning oil and gas is the biggest source of air pollution, which is a leading cause, a leading health threat, right? And actually climate is a #1 health threat of the century. So if you have people who are concerned about COVID and healthcare, and you're making a link to climate, there's some ideas there. And second slide, please, Mark. So if people are concerned, and the other top concerns in Ontario now are costs and housing. So I think approaching it from the perspective of fairness and cost savings, approaching answers you might give people who are asking you difficult questions, with the idea of doing a fair share and equity, the idea of cost savings, in job and GDP benefits, and in the idea, the cost of inaction, that type of thing. And entry points could be that Canada is among the world's top polluters, so doing our fair share is important, not being left behind. I believe Lynn mentioned earlier, solar is done in a community project. So an idea that is put forward is to illustrate equitable examples at scale and speed. So working together in the community to do a whole bunch of solar at once and bring the cost down is like a really accessible local example that you might use with people. So this is just kind of like a frame for thinking about how to handle difficult topics and questions. And now we're actually going to move into the really fun part. I'm going to pass it over to the actors now.
Hi, everyone. We're going to try a little role play as to what might happen if you get asked certain questions. Sometimes people are a little reluctant to take on a facilitation role because they might get asked questions and get off the agenda. And so we're just going to try and illustrate some questions that might come up and how you can maybe acknowledge what the person is bringing forward and then also get back to the agenda. So we'll do these little role plays for you now. And I think, Susan, are you starting? No, Sandra's starting, aren't you, Sandra? Yeah, you're the first.
So, Lynn, imagining a society with no fossil fuels seems a little unrealistic. I mean, we rely on fossil fuels, to travel. We use plastic all the time. We have to drive greater and greater distances to, just get to work. Like how does this even happen?
Yeah, I'm hearing you, Sandra. It can seem really difficult because we do use a plastic in our lives, and plastic comes from fossil fuels. And if we're driving a gasoline car to get to work, we are making emissions. So it is kind of a challenge as to how we can reduce our emissions. And it's not really something like we can do some things as individuals, but as a society, we need to do things like get better transit. So it's possible to that you don't have to drive to work, or if the government brought in subsidies for an EV, you might be able to drive an electric car if you have to drive. But these kinds of solutions, it does take time to work them all out and to figure them all out. And I think we could use some more discussion time on this. So how about if I put this on the bike rack and we come back to it if we have a little more time in the conversation?
Yeah, that's
because that sounds okay. Yeah, because we're not perfect. We're a work in progress, and we're all we just don't want to get overwhelmed by the challenge because we can make progress together. So we'll come back and look at it more. Thank you. Over to you, Susan.
Well, Lynn, I have to say, I'm kind of surprised and disappointed in some of the things that you've brought up. You do realize that if we go with more electric, that means huge environmental impacts for our northern communities. You're talking about mining for minerals. Like, have you read anything about the Ring of Fire? Or what about all the flooding that hydroelectric can cause?
Yes, thank you, Susan. There are challenges in going electric, absolutely, but they're not always as insurmountable as we might think. So, for example, if we switch from gasoline heating to heat pumps, it is electric, but it's about 1/5 of the energy use that the gas is. And yes, if we're going with EVs, we need batteries, and batteries need minerals. And it's one of the reasons why we don't want everybody in the world to drive an EV, because the mining will be difficult and challenging. And when you mention our northern communities, like the Ring of Fire, I think it's really important to remember that we need to insist on free, prior, and informed consent. So those communities may or may not want to develop any mining on their lands, which are also carbon sinks, but they're their lands to make decisions about the future of. So yeah, there are challenges. And again, this is another one we might take a little more time to talk about. So let's put it on the bike rack and come back to it later. Is that all right, Susan?
That's great. Thanks for listening, Lynn.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Lynn, you've mentioned a lot about electric vehicles, you know, and all I think about is how expensive, you know, Teslas are, or, you know, just how expensive any sustainable product is. Me, like many other people, we're just worried about our next paycheck, you know, skyrocketing food costs, you know, being able to pay for rent and utilities. You know, how am I supposed to afford being a more sustainable person?
Yes, so it is, it can seem overwhelming. Like if you want to do a retrofit, that could be a lot of money. How would you get the support financially for that? Or if you wanted to drive an EV, they are expensive. And they're not for everyone necessarily. And there could be subsidies. Like as a society, if we want to make certain changes and support them, we can make it more affordable for people. So like long-term loans, or no interest loans for retrofits and grants for certain parts of retrofits, and help with transportation, whether it's transit you rely on or whether it's an EV that you're trying to buy or an e-bike. I'm just getting an e-bike myself. I'm getting a conversion kit to convert my regular bike into an e-bike. And so there are some ways that aren't as expensive as others, and actually EVs over a lifetime are less expensive than a gasoline car because of all the gas, oil, and repairs that gasoline car requires. And of course, it puts a burden on our atmosphere and our health. Our health will be better if we can reduce emissions too. So there's a lot of benefits from reducing emissions. That's not to say it's not a challenge to do, and it does make it, you may not see as many options if you are having to really watch your bank account, for example, in order to manage paying your rent and basics. And there's more to talk about the costs of this kind of transition. So again, how about if we come back to it later in the evening? We'll just pop it on the bike rack for now.
Yeah, no, thanks for addressing my concerns about economic privilege. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Oh, Lynn, thank you so much for talking to me today. You're such an inspiration as always. Everything is being so interesting. I'm taking so much away from this, but I could never do what you're doing. I mean, no one would listen to me. And to be honest, I don't even think anyone cares what I have to say, especially not my MPP. I mean, he's useless. I mean, I'm just one person here, Lynn.
Yeah, I'll hear you, Susan. It can seem overwhelming. And also if certain things are new for you, like it could be that you haven't talked to your MPP before, or you've tried and they weren't giving you an appointment, you know, so it can be a challenge. And that's one of the reasons why it's really good to be in a group, because groups can accomplish more together. We have been able to get meetings with MPPs, and it makes a difference. And also, you know, the skills you're learning tonight to facilitate conversation. Don't worry about having all the knowledge that we're presenting to you here tonight. Just get a friendly conversation going with your neighbors, your work colleagues, or whoever that you want to bring around the table, or your virtual table in the Zoom room, to talk about climate and just hear what those concerns are. So focus on and just say, we can get more information, right? What do people want more information about? We can look for it together, or bring a speaker in if we want to look at a certain area. But the important thing is to help get newer people started in the conversation. And just like you, they're probably feeling a little overwhelmed, or who's going to listen? How am I going to do it, right? But the first step is starting the conversation. So thanks for coming tonight, and I hope that gives you some encouragement to work on it for, okay?
Thanks, Lynn. You're always inspiring me to be a better engaged citizen.
We're all doing it together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's just trying to show you that you can kind of acknowledge people's concerns, and at the same time, And you don't have to give all that information that I gave. It can, you know, if you don't have that at your fingertips, do not worry. Just say, yep, it can be challenging. And let's talk about that more later and maybe see what we want to find out about or get a speaker. But for now, let's go back to our agenda, because you will have an agenda for your conversation that you want to kind of take the group through. Okay, so I'm done for now. Yeah, unless there's any questions, I think people will have a chance in the groups to talk about the concerns you might have about running a conversation.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and apologies to Colleen. Thank you so much, Colleen, for setting the framework there, and great acting, the rest of you. Like Marge says, Oscars to Lynn. Anyways, now we are going to spend pretty much the rest of the time in smaller groups and just come back briefly at the end, giving ourselves lots of time to mull over what we've talked about and what we can do. So your facilitators in the groups will help lead you through the conversation mapping exercise, and hopefully you've got a pen and paper or a computer you can type up some notes on when you get.
My goodness. So I've been spotlighted, and I think it's because I'm supposed to share the survey, just to touch on it, to show you what you might, highlight some of the questions that you might help us with for the 2 monthly support meetings we're having and ongoing. And we've got lots of time. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm just going to screen share the survey so you can see it. So let me know if you can see, if you can't see it, but this is our survey, and the chat, it'll be put in the chat. And basically there's some common questions, and they're, you know, sort of the normal questions, but I want to highlight a couple. You can scroll through. We've added a couple kind of newish questions. So I just want to, so the number 8, if you look at it, we're planning 2 support meetings in March, and we would love suggestions for content that would help you host or facilitate your workshops that you're planning or your conversations that you're planning. Also, if you look at number 10A and 10B, in 10A, we're asking for your email and your postal code if you are interested in being paired up or being on a list of facilitators or hosts in key ridings. So you see in 10B, if you choose number 1 or number 2, then it would really be helpful to have your postal code. And then we can help you buddy up or, you know, see if we can support each other in different areas. So I wanted to highlight those 2 things. And I'm going to stop sharing, but you're welcome to follow the link to the survey and then give us your thoughts. They'd be really helpful. And I think I'm passing back over to Val now.
Hi, everyone. I've been told that I'm rather quiet, so I'm holding on to my wire now in hopes that you hear me better. Yeah, we're going to finish a little early, I think, and that would give you time after this to fill out the survey on your own and send it right in to us so that you don't forget to do it.
Okay, so, but Val,
yes.
if we've got extra time, could we just invite people to put a comment in the chat from their group? Our group is so fantastic. So if people want to put what they're taking away in the chat.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Can we do that?
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and you can do that while I'm just kind of doing the final chat here, which is that on behalf of Climate Fest, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I think that I can speak for all the groups that they were very engaging, and we hope you are leaving with a clearer idea of how to launch a kitchen table climate conversation in your community, remembering always that a very good place to start is with people you know and with the help of a buddy. And as Colleen mentioned already, we have these 2 support meetings coming up. we'll be contacting you about them and hoping that you can come to them with further plans and any questions you may have. I did want to say that, you know, anybody who wants to add other difficult questions they can think of that they'd love to have, you know, the likes of Lynn tell them how to answer, please, please write those in the chat too, or on your survey. And finally, many thanks to our tech people behind the scenes. Couldn't do it without them. Mark Shapland, Ray Nicano, and Sharon Bider. Thanks to all the facilitators, the actors and presenters, and most of all, thank you so much to all of you for spending this time with us here tonight. So I think people are still popping things in the chat, and we will keep that chat, and it'll be part of our resource document.
And Val, can I just jump in and say that there are some action days coming up? For example, March 12th is an action day that 350 and the Council of Canadians have put together, focused on the, I don't know if Colleen wants to say more about it, but focused on
Just Transition.
Just Transition Act that we need to get. And on March 25th is going to be a global climate strike. So there'll be things happening in different communities, and I'm going to try and find the link for the map that shows those actions around the province, and I'll put that in the chat. And as Val mentioned earlier, we're developing the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, which will have either 10 or 12 asks. We're just kind of narrowing it down right now. And we can make that available to people to just to give people a bit of a program. One of the people in our group said she's meeting with a candidate in her riding, which is fabulous. Meetings with candidates is a really good thing to do, and wants to be sure of knowing what to ask for that person to be putting in a program. So that's an excellent next step to come out of this. I really just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank Val too for facilitating us so well tonight. That was really well done, and Colleen for all your information. Yeah, it was great, really good. Sandra and Susan for doing that fun little acting piece with me, and of course the tech team as well. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take a screenshot. We have two screens. So first screen, everybody smile. Here we go. Thank you. Yeah, you can wave. That's right too. And you can unmute and say anything you'd like to say. Here we go. Some nice smiles there on screen two. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Bye, bye.